Well, good evening. My name is Sam Easterling, and I have the privilege of serving as the head of the VIA Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at Virginia Tech. It's a pleasure to welcome all of you to the presentation by the Virginia Tech Flint Water Study Team. I'm confident that I speak for everyone gathered here in Quillen Auditorium, everyone watching us through the live stream, and most assuredly the residents of Flint, Michigan, when I say I really wish we weren't here. However, given the public health crisis that did occur, I'm also equally certain that no better team of faculty and students could be assembled to address and mitigate the problem than the Virginia Tech Flint Water Study Team, and I'm looking forward to their presentation. At this time, it's my pleasure to introduce Virginia Tech's Provost, Dr. Thanasis Rakakis, to offer welcoming remarks. Dr. Rakakis.
Thank you, Sam. I'd like to welcome all of you here, those of you in the overflow room, and all those of you attending online to this very important seminar by Professor Marc Edwards, his collaborators, and his students. What you're about to hear is a stellar example of the activities of a 21st century land-grant institution like Virginia Tech. The 21st century global land-grant integrates scientific discovery with societal impact. 6 meaningful partnerships between academia and community, approaches complex problems of the world in the real-world context, like Flint, as the true classroom, brings different disciplines and diverse communities together to seek solutions, places service at the core of academia, and defines the improvement of the daily human experience across the world as the key goal of teaching and research. I would like now to introduce the Dean of the College of Engineering, Dick Benson, who will introduce our speaker. Dick.
Thank you, Professor Rakakis. Good evening. I want to add my welcome to all of you who have joined us here in the Quillen Auditorium at Virginia Tech. Welcome to the many others watching through streaming video, and all those standing in the back. There's a lot of folks. In just a minute, we will hear from the members of the Flint Water Study Team, most of whom are graduate students in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering. We take great pride in the impactful work being done at Virginia Tech, but rarely have we seen work that was so urgent. I would also describe the work of the Flint Water Study Team as courageous, a word that I do not use lightly. To begin the presentation, I want to introduce the team's leader, Professor Marc Edwards. Let me tell you a few things about Dr. Edwards. He is the Charles Lunsford Professor of Civil Engineering at Virginia Tech. He received his bachelor's degree in biophysics from SUNY Buffalo and an MS PhD in environmental engineering from the University of Washington. His MS thesis and PhD dissertation won national awards from the American Water Works Association, the Association of Environmental Engineering and Science Professors, and the Water Environment Federation. Among the awards he has received are the Praxis Award in Professional Ethics from Villanova University, a MacArthur Fellowship or Genius Grant from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, and a listing among the foremost innovators in water from around the world by Time magazine. Professor Edwards has also been awarded the Presidential Faculty Fellowship by the White House, and he received the State of Virginia Outstanding Faculty Award in 2006. In 2013, Dr. Edwards was the 9th recipient in a quarter of a century of the IEEE Barris Award for courageously defending the public interest at great personal risk, and we again hear that word, courage. Professor Edwards' paper on lead poisoning of children in Washington, D.C. due to elevated lead in drinking water was judged the outstanding science paper in environmental science and technology in 2010. He now leads the 25-person Flint Water Study Team, addressing the problems of severe iron and lead corrosion, Legionella, and pipe leaks in Flint, Michigan. So please join me in welcoming Professor Marc Edwards.
Well, thank you all so much for coming today, and I just want to say at the outset that this whole endeavor is really a collaborative effort between myself and a mom in Washington, D.C. named Dr. Yana Lambrinidou, and we fought side by side since 2007 to protect children in Washington, D.C., and after observing agency misconduct, we thought we had to do something about the way we educate our students. And so Jana took the lead and wrote this amazing grant called Bridging the Gap Between Engineers and Society, Learning to Listen. And so today, this is kind of the practicum of the grant, where I was able to try to employ all the amazing things that Jana taught me personally over the years, and that we learned with our students in the class. And essentially, it's been a practicum for students who have taken the class to try to apply those techniques. So what they're going to be presenting is our Flint Water Studies journey with Flint residents, lead, Legionella, and leaks. So thanks.
So we want to start out by talking a little bit about Flint and how we became involved in studying the water quality there. In the boom of the auto industry in the 1950s and 1960s, Flint had over 200,000 people living there, and they had one of the highest per capita incomes in the whole world. But starting in the 1980s, with the decline of the auto industry, Flint also suffered financially. Today, they have under 100,000 people living there, 42% of which are living below the national poverty line. And due to that economic decline, essentially no new houses have been built in Flint since the mid-1980s. And this is important for lead release. But to understand why, you need to understand where lead comes from in drinking water distribution systems. There's essentially no source of lead from the water utility, from the water that the water utility delivers up to a property line. But the houses are connected to the water main by a service line. And in Flint, an estimated 50% of homes have a lead service line. Lead can also come from the plumbing within the homes. It can come from lead and brass, and it can come from solder. Solder is essentially the stuff that glues copper pipes together. And it wasn't until 1986 that lead solder was banned from being used in homes. So in Flint, unless your home was completely remodeled, since 1986, it likely has some source of lead in it. And that wasn't a huge concern while Flint was still buying water from Detroit, because Detroit dosed a corrosion inhibitor to keep the lead on the plumbing and out of the water. But when the emergency manager appointed by the governor decided to instead treat the Flint River water as a drinking water source, everything changed. When the switch was made, it was the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality's responsibility to make sure that the city of Flint dosed appropriate corrosion control into the water. That's a federal law, and they violated that federal law. There was no corrosion control in Flint in the beginning. We also now know that the Flint River water is extremely corrosive to metals due to its water chemistry. So this is basically a perfect storm for lead release in an older city like Flint with substantial amounts of sources of lead in homes. In fact, corrosion of all metal pipes was so bad in Flint that the iron water mains that Flint has were bursting at a much higher frequency than when they were using water from Detroit. And the citizens of Flint immediately knew something was wrong with their water. They were getting the notices from the water utility to boil their water because they had E. coli and coliform bacteria in there. They were being told that they had high levels of disinfectant byproducts in the water. And you can physically see the corrosion, the result of the corrosion of the iron mains in their taps. And the politicians in Flint, informed by the same people who neglected to dose corrosion control, were telling everyone that the water was safe to drink. General Motors, a primary buyer of Flint water, quickly noticed the change as well. Their engine parts were actually corroding, and so they switched away from using the city of Flint. One of the citizens, one of the first citizens to contact our group was Leanne Walters, who's here with us tonight. And she had the city come and test her water twice. And both times they found elevated levels of lead in her water. And she tried to work with the Department of Environmental Quality to address this problem. But they said that they wouldn't help her because they assumed that she had a source of lead in her premise plumbing from the solder or the brass. And so she went to the EPA and was put into a contact with an employee named Miguel Del Toro. And Mr. Del Toro went to her house and confirmed that she had no metal pipe in her house at all. And when Mrs. Walters sent us the first samples that we analyzed from Flint, we were extremely concerned. Of the first samples that we analyzed, on average, she had 133 times more lead in her water than the maximum EPA allowable limit. And in the worst sample, she had almost 1,000 times more lead. That's hazardous waste levels of lead. So in response, Mr. Del Toro wrote a memo to his colleagues at the EPA to sound the alarm of a major concern to the public health due to the lack of corrosion control in Flint. When this memo was leaked to the media, Mr. Del Toro was discredited by the MDQ. They called him a rogue agent, but in fact, he was simply trying to do his job. But the citizens of Flint persisted, and they continued to try to get their elected officials to understand that the water that they were being told to safe, that was safe to drink and was safe to give to their children, was in fact not safe at all. And observing this dangerous attitude, we knew that if we got involved, we could supply them some funding, some analytical support, and sound science in order to help them understand whether their water was truly safe to drink or not. So we were all in for Flint, and we will continue to be all in for Flint. And what you're going to hear now is our story. Thank you.
Lead everywhere. This section is all about lead. The Flint Water Study website, Facebook and Twitter pages were launched in late August as a way to inform Flint residents about the water quality issues and to bring about public awareness. We assembled 300 kits to be sent to Flint, and this was our first group effort on this project. Before this effort, we were a research group. At the end of this, we became a team. Working towards a common goal really cemented our interpersonal bonds. Sid, William, and Dr. Jeff Parks created this video to educate Flintstones, as the residents of Flint would like to call themselves, on the proper procedure to sample their water. Volunteers in Flint who were handing out kits to the public made watching this video a prerequisite for the citizens. William became a YouTube star overnight. Volunteers in Flint devised a tamper-proof system to make sure that no one opened the kits once they were sealed by the homeowners. We have decided to implement the same procedure in our future projects. Their unwavering dedication is the reason behind we getting 277 kits instead of the 75 that we initially expected. Churches became collection centers, and residents became citizen scientists. Concerned Pastors for Social Action, the ACLU of Michigan, the Democracy Action, What Are You Fighting For, are few of the many groups who were involved in this effort. Kurt Guyette, Leanne Walters, Claire McClinton, Dennis Walters, and Naira Sharif are pictured on the top left.
My primary role in the Flint Water Study was helping prepare and process lead kits, while also helping to communicate results. The rapid response needed to complete this portion of this project was critical. All student and researcher team members sacrificed time outside of classes, work, and other ongoing projects in order to ensure that samples were analyzed properly. Everything moved quickly and efficiently. Flint residents needed for their fears to be confirmed by us about the safety of their drinking water. We shipped our lead kits on August 13th and had preliminary results by the end of the month, thanks to the attentiveness of Flint residents. There are families and homes behind every sample processed. What we did and continue to do was and is for them, which is why the key to success in our sampling effort was the dedication and attentiveness of Flint residents to guaranteeing that the truth about their water would be exposed, showed by the unprecedented support for our sampling and rate of participation in the Flint water study. In addition, the role of our social media presence influenced the communication of our results and connected us to the community efforts leading the way on the ground in Flint. Our team's involvement in the project assured that our scientific knowledge and resources would be best used for proving that Flint water was largely unsafe. It is estimated that our team has spent a combined 3 person-years on this project over the course of the last 6 months alone. As an undergraduate research assistant in civil engineering, being involved in the Flint water study showed me the ethical and social context of the work that I do every day. The influence of our team's interactions with Flint residents on the work we're doing in a laboratory setting humbled my perspective on the significance of drinking water research. I have learned that environmental engineering is about ensuring better livelihoods for all people. And in America today, this is needed nowhere more than in Flint, Michigan. Environmental justice cannot be taught in an undergraduate classroom, but rather experienced through the important narratives shaped by citizen science efforts and mobilizing calls for community action that we as scientists and engineers hold responsibility for.
The city of Flint tested 69 homes as part of their compliance for the lead and copper rule. We targeted 1 in 4, or 75 of the 300 kits that we sent out to return. Due to the commendable efforts of the volunteers of Flint, we received 277. And at 3 samples a kit, we analyzed 831 samples. We analyzed 12 times more samples in a matter of 6 weeks than the city and state did in a matter of 6 months. The 90th percentile for first draw, or the first sample collected after 6 hours of stagnation, at least, at a faucet, was 26.8 parts per billion of lead. The EPA action level is 15 parts per billion. There is no safe level of lead in drinking water. The highest first draw that we saw was 158 parts per billion. The highest overall sample was 1,051 parts per billion. The data we have here is not representative of the worst case homes, as the sampling we did was at random. After analyzing the samples, the next step was to communicate the results. There was a sense of urgency in the team to analyze samples and send the results out as soon as possible, as every day, every hour that we delayed the results, unsuspecting Flint residents would be drinking the water. Our definition of high lead, so we called Flint residents who had high lead. Our definition of high lead was at least 2 of the 3 samples have more than 5 parts per billion of lead. We called about 70 residents at the end of this effort. Some lasted 10 minutes, some calls lasted more than an hour. We emailed and sent letters as well, just to make sure that everyone who sent us a kit had their results.
Even though they knew that there was no corrosion control in the water, MDQ still continued to claim that Flint water was not corrosive. So we decided to run experiments to compare the corrosiveness of Flint water to Detroit water. For this experiment, we used copper pipes with lead solder and placed them into 3 different water types: Detroit water, Flint water, and then Flint water with orthophosphate, which is a typical corrosion inhibitor. As you can see from this picture, the white particles floating inside of the Flint water is actually the lead that leached from the solder. And at the end of every week, we measured the amount of lead in water in parts per billion. And by the end of week 3, we found that Flint River water had 19 times more lead than the Detroit water. We also sent the same test to students in an elementary school just outside of Flint to show the simplicity and reproducibility of our experiment. Although the levels of lead varied between each group, you can clearly see that the levels of lead in the Flint water, which is represented by the red bars, was always much more corrosive than the Detroit water. In group 5, the lead levels were actually 40 times higher than in the Detroit water. Throughout the experiment, we also asked the students to make observations, and many of them said that they thought the Flint water looked like snow globes because of all the white particles that were floating around in it. They also described the water as being disgusting and that it looked unsafe to drink. We conducted a similar experiment to determine the iron corrosion between Flint and Detroit water, and for this experiment we used a steel nail that was 99.9% iron. And the results you see pictured here are after just 6 days of experimentation. You can see that the Flint water is extremely brown, and this is due to the iron corrosion, and this is what Flint residents have been experiencing all along and have been complaining about. We also tested the effect of this iron corrosion on the levels of chlorine in the water, and as you can see, the Detroit water started out with a lower amount of chlorine, but after 12 hours it still had about half the amount of chlorine, whereas the Flint water had no chlorine in it after just 9 hours. This is extremely important because this lack of chlorine makes it more likely for harmful bacteria to grow in the water. We continued this iron corrosion experiment for 1 month, and you can see that the nail that was in the Flint water corroded a lot more than the Detroit water, and this is what GM was experiencing and why they chose to switch their water once the town started using Flint River water. After further analysis, we determined that the Flint River water was 8.6 times more corrosive than the Detroit water. At a town hall meeting in September, Dr. Edwards presented our results to the citizens of Flint. At that time, we had already received and analyzed 252 of the kits that we had sent to Flint. And we made sure to highlight the 2 zip codes that had the worst cases of lead. In these 2 zip codes, 1 out of every 5 homes that were tested had above the EPA action level of lead in their water. Even though now emails show that MDEQ knew there was no corrosion control in their water, they still tried to discredit the work that we were doing and the results that we were producing. They claimed that this group specializes in looking for high lead levels. They pull the rabbit out of the hat everywhere they go, so nobody should be surprised when the rabbit comes out of the hat, even if you can't figure out where it's done.
A week after Dr. Edwards and Sid went to Flint and released our results at the town hall meeting, Dr. Mona Hanna-Atisha, the director of the Hurley Medical Center's pediatric residency program, and her team released results of a study that they did. The results showed that there was a significant increase in the blood lead levels in the children of Flint since the switch. State regulators again were quick to discredit Dr. Mona Hanna-Atisha's study. The water controversy is becoming near hysteria. I wouldn't call them irresponsible, I would call them unfortunate, were the comments on the results. Flint's drinking water is safe in that it's meeting state and federal standards. Dr. Mona Hanna-Atisha's study led to a declaration of a public health emergency in Genesee County. Soon after the public health emergency, a critical mass had been reached, and the issue got national attention, with Ms. Leanne Walters and the Flint water crisis making front page in the New York Times. This was October the 7th. After months and months of neglect, help finally arrived for Flintstones in the form of bottled water and filter donations. The state of Michigan spent $12 million to reconnect the city of Flint to the Detroit system on the 16th of October. What was once deemed impossible became possible due to the combined efforts of everyone involved. The state then spent $4 million on free water testing, lead filters, and even blood testing. So this is a recap of the timeline of the Flint water crisis. August 13th, we sent out 300 kits to Flint. August 31st, our results from 120 kits indicated a serious lead and water problem. September 24th, Dr. Mona Hanna-Atisha and her team releases results of their study on elevated blood lead levels in children. We realized that the residents of Flint need water filters and a lot of them cannot afford it. So what started as Self-donations by Dr. Edwards to residents of Flint morphed into a greater care campaign by the United Way of Genesee County, and that was started on September the 25th. September 26th to 29th, a public health emergency was declared in Genesee County. October 16th, the city of Flint switched back to Detroit water. January 5th, 2016, Governor Snyder of Michigan declares emergency in Flint. And then finally, January 16th, President Obama signs an emergency declaration. Federal aid is finally coming for Flint.
We are here to highlight the trips that we took to Flint in 2015. So, reporters and state officials began questioning why we were using Flint residents to do our lead testing, because they believed that the residents would put lead in their own drinking water just to draw attention to themselves. So we decided that we needed to go to Flint ourselves and take additional samples to what we were sending them, as well as meet with them. We took 4 trips between August and December of 2015 in order to present our results to them, as well as gather these samples. What is listed on this slide are all the parameters we were able to measure from our trips. Nothing compares to the quantity of samples we were able to get from the lead kits we mailed there, but by traveling there ourselves, we were able to provide more technology to the residents than what we could mail. For example, we left a chlorimeter with Leanne and her family so that she could consistently measure her chlorine in her water. Our first trip consisted of 5 members of our team: Dr. Edwards, Dr. Otto Schwacke, Colin Richards, Min Tang, and myself, driving to Flint in Mrs. Edwards' van. And we want to take this time to apologize to Mrs. Edwards for the holes in her carpet from the acid that was spilled. Additionally, William Rhodes and Emily Garner spent over 80 hours in labs preparing the supplies for us to take with us. After our 11-hour drive to Flint, we spent the evening with Leanne getting introduced to her experience in the lead crisis that was going on. The rest of our time was spent sampling the city's monitoring sites, as well as homes of people who had known health problems. Most importantly, we were able to meet with the powerful and courageous leaders in Flint who knew about this problem before we did, specifically Naira Sharif, Claire McClinton, Leanne Walters, Melissa Mays, and Laura Sullivan, who are pictured here. Within a week or 2 of returning from this trip, we had started to receive results from the lead sampling kits we had mailed to the people of Flint. Dr. Jeff Parks worked hard to analyze these samples and get us results quickly, so that in less than a month, we had received 251 of the 300 lead sampling kits we had sent out. This is a remarkable return rate in numbers and in time, and it's only due to the incredible time and effort put in by the people who were in Flint at the time. The second trip was made by Sid Roy and Dr. Edwards. They met with additional folks on the ground, as well as took follow-up samples from the results we had received from the kits, presented our results, and attended a press conference. They also were able to attend a city council meeting. This video here is what they experienced and what the people of Flint were experiencing every day as they were trying to get attention drawn to this clean water crisis.
Ma'am, I'm going to ask you one last time to stop. If you don't, then I'm going to have you arrested. That's it. Officer, can you please have her taken out of the meeting?
We would be able to file 42. Don't do it, man. Don't do it, man. Don't do it. Don't do it, man. Let these people speak. We're dying here, God dang it. Don't take her, Josh. I'm telling you. Don't do it, man. Don't do it, God. I don't need to yell, man. I'm trying to be respectful, Josh. Don't do it, Josh.
Mr. Palladino, can you please sit down?
Mr. Palladino Jr., sir. Don't do this.
Sit down.
After we released the lab results to the public, a lot of pressure was placed on Michigan, and a plan was made to switch back to Detroit water in mid-October 2015 to possibly reduce the magnitude of corrosion problem. Once we have heard the news, we decided to go back for another water sampling before the switch, specifically focusing on Legionella, which was known to cause Legionnaire's disease. And Dr. Shuaki, Joyce, and I went on a trip. We sampled 2 hospitals and 2 universities. A photo on the slide shows the drinking water coming out from one hospital faucet 1 hour before the switch. And I really hope it never happens. And after the sampling, we did all the sample analysis back in Blacksburg. An example of a positive Legionella plate is also shown on the slide. In early December, Marc and Anurag went on a first trip. During the trip, Marc visited Mrs. Wise's class and discussed the coupon test results with primary school students. Christina just talked about the results. And Marc also did another presentation at medical center and got a bunch of interviews. Anurag and Marc also got an award from the mayor of Flint on behalf of all people in Flint Water Study Team. And for the personal impact, so personally, what I've learned from these trips was that the work we have done was completing a team effort. It could not be completed without the help from people in Flint, nor without our drinking water expertise. So we should be really proud of ourselves because we're willing to work together and make this happen. And in the meantime, I'm happy that we are able to find the truth about Flint water issues, and we're also happy to say that people in Flint are open to what we say about their water. We're also happy to see the people involved and help them by listening to their issues. So we all should be continue working on how to be a good listener and how to communicate science with the public and let the public's voice heard.
As you've heard, Flint's drinking water pipes have been undergoing an extreme level of corrosion. In addition to being problematic for release of lead, corrosion also has implications for bacterial growth. After the initial switch to Flint River water, Flint exceeded regulatory standards for E. coli, so that was one of the bacteria we monitored when we went to Flint, along with a list of other potentially harmful bacteria shown here. One of these bacteria we monitored for is a pathogen known as Legionella. Legionella most commonly causes an infection known as Legionnaire's disease. And Legionnaire's disease is a type of pneumonia which tends to impact immunocompromised populations. So for example, it can be a big problem among the elderly. And unlike most waterborne pathogens, you don't usually get Legionella by drinking water, but rather by inhaling it. So one way people tend to get Legionella is in the shower when the bacteria become aerosolized into tiny droplets that can be inhaled. Legionella is actually the leading cause of drinking water outbreaks in the US and other developed countries. Whenever we submitted a proposal to the National Science Foundation back in August for a grant to help us fund our work in Flint, we didn't have any information about an outbreak of Legionnaire's disease at this point, but we hypothesized that the catastrophic conditions in the Flint system could create a perfect storm that could lead to ideal conditions for growth of bacteria like Legionella. And there are 3 major reasons for this. One of these reasons is an abundance of nutrients in the Flint River water compared to the treated Detroit water, which supports growth of bacteria like Legionella. The second reason is an abundance of iron. So the Flint River water was causing corrosion of the cast iron pipes, leading to that brown water that the Flint residents have been seeing, and Legionella grow really well in the presence of iron. And in general, we saw the presence of a lot of different bacteria related to corrosion of pipes. So for example, you can see here 5 different tests we conducted for corrosion-causing bacteria, and you can see that there are color differences in each of the tests when you compare the top row, which we completed using pure water, to the test in the bottom row, which we completed using Flint water. So that color change indicates an abundance of corrosion-causing bacteria in the Flint water. The third reason we thought we might see Legionella is the absence of chlorine. So the corrosion of the cast iron pipes, as Christina demonstrated, consumes chlorine so that by the time the water reaches buildings, there's no chlorine left to keep these bacteria at bay.
And as we had predicted, Flint had problems with Legionella. 87 cases and 9 deaths were reported in Genesee County, where Flint is located, in 2014 and 2015, starting immediately after the city had switched the Flint River water as their drinking water source. And these outbreaks are unique in a few ways. One big one is that we, as far as we know, they are the first, if not one of the first, examples of major Legionnaire's disease outbreaks caused by rampant, widespread corrosion-related infrastructure damage of a city's drinking water distribution system. They're also very big. Looking back at some other major Legionnaire's disease outbreaks in the United States, we can see that the Genesee County outbreaks rank among the top 5. For a point of comparison, the outbreak that occurred in New York City and the Bronx this summer, one of the biggest in American history, had about 124 cases and 12 deaths. In absolute terms, more cases, more deaths than in Genesee County. But when you take into account the fact that there are about 14 times more people living in the Bronx than in Flint, the impact, the relative impact on the community there is potentially much larger. This kind of hints at the very large incidence. That's the cases per capita that occurred in Flint. Very high numbers that drastically went up after that water change. And as we can see from this graph, during the water crisis in Flint, people there were about 8 times more likely than the average American to contract Legionnaire's disease. So a big concern a lot of people have been voicing is they're asking why it took so long for the government to respond to the Legionnaire's disease outbreak that occurred in Genesee County. And this is a good question, but when you look at all the facts, it's pretty clear that the agencies involved, relatively speaking, responded fairly quickly. So Governor Snyder, within a week of his office receiving the reports about the outbreaks, held a press conference to discuss them. During this conference, he talked about how the Genesee County Health Department and the Michigan State Health Department have been working over the last 2 years investigating the outbreaks. And kind of long story short summary of their findings, they couldn't necessarily say that the Flint River water was the cause of the outbreaks because of a lack of data, effectively. Kind of want to take a little break here, sort of a PSA to say that as a group, we feel there's currently no evidence that the county and state health departments did not do their due diligence in quickly and effectively examining and reporting the Legionnaire's disease outbreaks in Genesee County. These sort of epidemiological investigations are very difficult and timely to conduct, and you absolutely do not want to put out false information on this topic. So despite the fact that we can't 100% conclusively say the Flint River water caused these outbreaks, all the evidence seems to be pointing that it's very likely that when Flint switched over to the Flint River from Detroit water as their drinking water source, this led to conditions in the city's drinking water infrastructure that caused the environment to be more conducive to the growth of Legionella and potentially played a role in the outbreaks. And many different groups have been agreeing with this idea, including public health agencies, hospitals, and Legionella experts. So jumping back to current day, the county and state health departments are finishing up their investigations, and they have plans to continue their monitoring throughout the year and onward, looking for Legionella in Genesee County and Flint. They've actually invited us to help out. So to fund this, we've applied for another NSF grant, a supplement this time, so we may continue to perform environmental sampling in Flint hospitals in 2016, hopefully starting in the next month. Thank you.
Now that you've heard the science of everything, and in fact, the entire tragedy is something we can miss if you just focus on the details. So what I'll try to do is step back and give you a big picture, and hopefully we can make sense, I don't think, but we'll try, of what happened and where do we go from here. For 18 months, that's 3 semesters, by the way, for the undergrads, 100,000 residents of Flint were exposed to this toxic water. This toxic water, by the way. This is an actual sample. They did nothing to deserve this. This mostly poor town was ignored, and citizens who made their voices heard were shamed, humiliated, and even arrested, like we saw. On top of this, they're asked to pay their monthly water bills that average $150 a month, even higher than Las Vegas. For this, now, this was completely preventable, and yet we now know that about 9,000 kids, all kids in Flint, were exposed to this at some point, and we have 200 confirmed cases. In the summer of 2015, according to the state's own data, there are zip codes where 1 in 10 kids had an elevated blood lead level. And possibly a few residents died because of Legionnaire's disease. This is what has happened in Flint. And if it hadn't been for persistent citizens like you, Leanne, sorry, and so many outside forces, people would still be drinking this. At this point, if you're angry or shaken or want to swear, it's okay. But how did this happen? We know that the emergency manager made that decision to switch to Flint River as a cost savings measure, but a failure to follow federal corrosion control law by the MDEQ was what allowed this to continue for 18 months. We still couldn't believe it. To figure this out, we filed Freedom of Information or FOIA requests on all government agencies involved. Marc became an investigative reporter, and together we set forth to uncover the truth. We conclude that this continued because of subversion of democracy, because of short-sighted decisions that were made by arrogant and hostile bureaucratic agents who were incompetent, who were obsessed with meeting regulations, and held a complete disregard for public health. We went through thousands of pages of emails and documents, and while it is hard to assign blame on who did what, that is what we engineers do. And therefore, this is our blame report card. MDEQ failed to follow corrosion control. That was federally mandated law. They failed to do it. So we blame them 100%. However, when you think about it, their job is to protect the public, and they did the exact opposite. But they were so bad, they would make all these arrogant, stupid statements about, Marc or us or Dr. Mona, the EPA scientist Miguel del Toro. Nobody believed them anyway. So it was so bad, it was kind of good. It kind of helped us on our way. So we assigned MDEQ about 70% blame on what happened. EPA, the heroic whistleblower Miguel del Toro, who you heard about earlier, wrote the memo, did his job, pointed out there was a serious lead and water problem, hundreds of thousands of people could be affected. That was good. Federal help, state help could be on their way. But his boss and the entire EPA Region 5, they shut him down. MDEQ continued to make blanket statements of the water safety while he was not allowed to talk to the media. And for months, they just sat on this. So they made it worse, and we assigned them 10% of the blame. Some of us in our group have reservations on this, but we think the decision by the emergency manager also contributed to what happened. So that's 10%. And finally, the Michigan governor, the city of Flint, and the health department, who were overly trusting of what DEQ was telling them despite their own data showing legitimate rise in elevated blood lead levels of kids. They would not look at their own data and think maybe there's a serious problem, but relied on what DEQ was saying, so they were at fault. 10%. The head of MDEQ, who couldn't say sorry to the people of Flint on television, resigned along with his spokesperson a few weeks ago, and 3 people in MDEQ who were responsible have been reassigned. The EPA Region 5 head, who apologized to Flint and MDEQ for the press getting a hold of Miguel's memo, she resigned last week. And there are other people who are on their way to get out. But let me give you a sense of what is going on here. Here's one example. Flint had actually failed the lead and copper rule. They had 71 samples, and it clearly showed they were in violation. They dropped 2 data points from 2 homes, including one from Leanne's, and then they passed the lead and copper rule. They turned an F grade to an A grade without practicing corrosion control, without going to homes with lead pipes and testing. Here's an EPA scientist writing to DEQ officials. Flint has sure gotten a lot of attention over the past year. I'm going to be positive, and I hope all this dies down once they connect to the new pipeline. So they're okay that people in Flint could drink this for 2 years because there's a new pipeline coming. Why bother testing? Who cares? So, wow, you know? Another email, which I really like. Look at the very bottom, where people in the health department go, we need to take action soon because otherwise the Virginia Tech folks will scandalize us all, as they had before with DC. And finally, this one, where when Dr. Mona was getting ready to publish her results, showing blood lead in kids had gone up. And they were using a very wonderful approach of having the perspective of a representative Flint child. And this official in the Michigan State government wrote, they're using a very emotional approach. Our challenge would be to show how our state data is different from what the hospital has found. So when all of us are saying that all of this is preventable, you know, this could have been stopped, what do we mean? We'll let the Daily Show explain it better.
The saddest thing about this leak is how little it would have cost to prevent it all.
The fix was about $100 a day. All of this could have been avoided for just that small amount of money.
$100 a day. Why didn't you say something? I want to call out to all my people in Africa right now watching The Daily Show. Because my friends, for only $100 a day, we can save a village in America and get these people drinking the water that they so badly need for just the price of 5 cups of coffee in New York.
It's funny, but it's also true. For a few tens of thousands of dollars, all this could have been avoided. What is the cost now? As you heard from Anurag and others, that the city is indeed in a state of emergency, announced by the mayor, then at the state level, and now by President Obama. And over $100 million is on their way for aid. But the way we look at it, there are 4 main areas where Flint badly needs help. The first is the damage done by this neurotoxin. So the kids in Flint especially need lifelong support for education, for nutrition, and for health services. In the interim period of whether the water is safe to drink, we need to do a thorough testing in the city to figure out if Flint is indeed meeting the lead and copper rule. Long term, of course, we have to look at replacing the water infrastructure, not just in Flint, but in the entire country. According to one estimate, it'll take $1.5 billion to replace all the pipes in Flint. And remember, the damage that has been done in the past 18 months cannot be undone. And finally, something that everyone's talking about and is so important is the question of trust. No one in Flint trusts the government. They don't even trust the filters that are being handed out. One of the few groups that the people in Flint trust are a group of 20-somethings, one 19-year-old, and a professor in a small town in Blacksburg, Virginia, 13 hours away. And how do we know this? Well, actually, they told us. This is the block or the rock, the way you look at it in Flint, where people just come in and paint what they like. This sign is no longer there, and we know this because we were there last night. And it has been repainted because it was someone's birthday. But the message that the people got out 3 days ago, how do you think the state responded to all of this? Turns out we've been officially hired to oversee testing in Flint, Michigan. The team that apparently pulls a rabbit hat is now in charge. We've come a long way. Throughout all of this, millions of people and celebrities from around the world have been working for months on the ground to help the residents. This is humanity at its finest. The Flint water crisis and our work has gained international attention and reminds us that we cannot take the most basic of our needs, including water, for granted. And I have 2 perspectives from 2 very different people that I want you to hear. The first is from a president when he says, I know if I was a parent in Flint, I would be beside myself if my kid's health could be at risk. The other is from a Girl Scout in Michigan. She's 10 years old, and here's what she says. Dear Governor, I'm so mad at what happened in Flint. It is bad for kids. They don't have clean water to drink for almost 2 years. I hope you fix the problem. A 10-year-old gets it, that as a people, as a nation, we should value the health of our children and families more than financial savings. The bigger picture here is, of course, America's infrastructure. According to the American Society of Civil Engineers, our infrastructure is crumbling, especially our water infrastructure got a D rating. Some of our pipes are over 100 years old, and for lead especially, we have millions of lead pipes spread out across the country. We take tap water for granted, and our water infrastructure, the pipes underground, are underappreciated. It'll take over $1 trillion, yes, $1 trillion in the coming decades to upgrade everything in the country. So, and when it comes to lead, there are already forces out there that are trying to weaken the lead and copper rule. We cannot allow the EPA to do this because Flint is a reminder of why you cannot shortchange basic services that we provide to our people. And we together provide as a government to make sure public health and safety is preserved. I'll leave you with a story that is very close to my heart. About 10 days ago, I got a call from a lady in Flint who was crying. She was crying on the phone because she had given, for over a year, her kids and her grandkids that water. She told me she poisoned her kids. It wasn't her fault, but the mother's heart will never accept that. And she thanked all of us for what we did. This is why many of us spent the last 6 months of our life pulling all-nighters, pulling weekends together, because we cared. It has changed who we are as human beings. As scientists and engineers, or just plain humans, we should respect the first canon of civil engineering, or just the first canon of humanity, which is we shall hold paramount the safety, the health, and the welfare of our public. Flint could have been prevented if others in our field had done their jobs. We are ashamed that this did not happen. But I'm really proud of what we accomplished here. It gives me hope for the future because it's these guys. This is the team that did it. I want to thank each and every one of you for making this happen. You are my heroes. With that, we have plenty of people to thank, especially the National Science Foundation, Virginia Tech, and mainly citizens of Flint, Leanne, for all you did. That brings us to the end of our presentation. We now have an award ceremony. And the way we want to look at this is we dedicate everything that has happened to the citizens of Flint. And to do that, I'll invite Pan to the stage.
The Flint residents has been on a long journey for 2 years now. And we can only imagine how tired they are because we have been working alongside them for the past 10 months. The Flint citizens, professors, doctors, and the county health department helped reveal the problem and avert a worse tragedy. Yet no one can really be pleased with the outcome. Flint is not the first widespread water lead poisoning case in the US, but we hope it will be the last. We need to better in the future. Also, we learned that in the dark times, we find heroes. You do not have to have run for president. You do not have to be a Nobel laureate. You can just be a normal person fighting for a just cause. Because power is not from the titles, but from the heart. We are very proud of the Flint residents, the Flintstones, who knew something was wrong and became citizen scientists to find the truth.
Thank you, and with that, I just wanted to note that there's really a symbiotic relationship between science and the public. And if that is ever ignored and it's really not nurtured, we are going to enter a new dark age. I really believe that. So as evidenced by the block and the amazing collaboration between the Flint Water Studies students and Flint residents, I just want you to give them all an amazing round of applause for all that they did. Okay, this story also illustrates something I tell my students if they weren't learned one thing from my class. It is that the most powerful force in the universe is a mother worried about the health of their child. And if you threaten that, mama will come and mess you up. Even if you're a powerful government agency. And that said, Leanne, I just want to note, I didn't put the name up there that implied you were the grizzly bear. That was Sid did that. So if you got a problem, you know where to go. But I did want to acknowledge really one of the amazing exemplary heroes of the whole Flint story. And I thought long and hard about, what would be an appropriate award for all that she's done. And so I started out with something really simple. I cut a ring out of a lead pipe. And I know, Leanne, this is probably not what you'd like at this point in time. Another big hunk of lead in your life. But, this isn't just any piece of lead pipe. It came from a house of an African-American child born in Washington, D.C., born the wrong place, the wrong time. Government agencies paid to protect this child from lead and water but did not do their job. And rather than admit their mistake, they went and held a press conference and tried to cover up what happened and said this child had no lead pipe. And I later found out this child did have a lead pipe. And this ring is cut from the house of that child. And when I found that lead pipe in 2005, I said to myself I would not stand by again and let this happen to another child, so help me. And the next time I heard those words were in 2015 from Leanne Walters, those exact words. So the ancient alchemists, they tried to turn lead into gold. And unfortunately, they failed. And if they'd succeeded, we'd be drinking from pipes made out of pure gold. But they didn't. And I think what's amazing about this story is that, Leanne, really, you did turn lead into gold. Your efforts really averted a major tragedy. And so please come up here, and I'd like to award you this Alchemy Award for what you were able to accomplish. So.
I knew this was my water up here.
It is.
Can I go back to Marc's house now?
She's staying with us, all right.
Hey. I just want to say thank you to the students at Virginia Tech, and to Marc for supporting us and to listening to us. Take him down there, please.
Come on, let's go.
It's been a very long journey, and it wouldn't have been possible without all the efforts of everybody involved. And this isn't just for my family, this is from all the people in Flint and all the people that were helping. The fact that they cared more than the city did and the state did when they were finding the levels of lead and they were reaching out and calling people instead of waiting for them to receive it in the mail, and caring enough about us to put the hours in and the work in that they did is something that we will always hold close to our heart. Our time working with Virginia Tech has been priceless, and the scientist in me that Marc has helped bring out is something I don't think will go away anytime soon, because we're still doing it. So, from me, from my family, and from the citizens of Flint, we say thank you.
Thank you.
So I think that's it. And
now
if you,
we have one more thing.
No,
so
you don't?
We do. We won't tell you what, but I think you saw it already. But to do the honors, can I please welcome Joyce?
So we have been trying very hard to keep the last part as a surprise for you. So for this man standing here, I probably do not need to further elaborate on the many extraordinary things you have done over the years, and that you continue to bring into this world a lot of brilliance, joy, compassion, and humanity. You have touched many lives and personally affected thousands, and we all think any kind of awards or recognition could not even come closely remote to that. But coming from as one of the students who has the privilege and opportunity to work so closely with you, I just want to say on behalf of all the students that we cannot express enough how we're just so impressed that your persistent efforts and everything you have sacrificed to fight through this journey, especially during the earlier and less known phases. So, yeah.
There's more.
And moreover, we want to say to us and to all of your students, you are also the most dedicated researcher and advisor one could ask for. You are always here with a zeal and passion to personally guide us in your lab and raise all our work to the highest standard of research and ethics. So, coming from the students, today we do have here what we feel best captures your influence on all of us and who you are to us. So I'm going to quote Lisa Wingate in her book, The Prayer Box, probably says it best. What is a lighthouse? I ask myself. It never moves. It cannot clear the waters, or it cannot calm the waters or clear the shoals. It can only cast light into the darkness. It can only point the way. Yet, through one lighthouse, you guide many ships. And as our lighthouse and also our beacon for steering us through our future career and life journeys, we thank you for your guidance through your mentorship and leadership.
So, Sam, do we still have time, or?
Yep, we do.
Okay. Try to put this up.
Do you want to read what people have said about you?
So wow, right? Wow. So we have some time now for a Q&A, and so what we'd like you to do, there are two microphones, there are lavalier mics wrapped around these posts here. You can just line up there if you have questions. We'd ask you to be sort of short and sweet and brief with your question to give folks as much time as possible to answer them. You can ask it in general, or you can direct it to a particular individual, and the team is prepared to respond. So, questions, and we also may have questions coming in through the Twitter feed, right? And I'll just kind of direct traffic.
In parts per billion, what were the median and the highest samples for lead?
The highest sample was from Leanne's house, was 13,500 parts per billion. I think the median was what, around?
The mean was, that's a hard question.
We'll get back to you.
That's fine, thank you.
This question comes from Twitter, from user podjoki123. If residents refuse to use existing pipes, is there an interim fix more than bottled water before pipes can be replaced?
Could you repeat the question, please?
Sure. If residents refuse to use existing pipes, is there an interim fix, a temporary fix, before pipes can be replaced other than bottled water?
Refuse to use existing pipes. So, I mean, they really have no choice but to use the existing pipes. You know, right now, the water is safe to use for bathing and showering. The EPA kind of A-team is now on the scene, and Flint has gone from having no corrosion control to kind of the best corrosion control in the world. So the lining on the pipes that was keeping the lead on the pipe and out of the water is being restored, and it's quite possible that if the water was tested today, it would actually be under the current lead and copper rule standard. But there's been damage done, obviously, to the people and the pipes, you know, little holes kind of eating their way through the pipes that, you know, is irreversible. And so it's an interesting ethical and legal question, what should be done about that? You know, how much should folks pay for this damage to critical infrastructure that really was no fault of the Flint residents to do? Yeah.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed this. This whole presentation has been fantastic.
Yeah, they were amazing, weren't they?
Everyone. I wonder, what was the pH of the Flint water before it was treated? And then I've also been wondering how much contamination is in the soil and the water, just background level.
Okay. So we looked at the Flint River, and that was a big concern of the residents because it had been used as a sort of toxic dumping ground over the years by factories. And in general, what we found was their existing treatments that they had removed the trace toxins that were present in the river water. It is true also the pH at one point, they just were not paying attention to the corrosion control situation at all. It dropped down to very dangerously low levels in August of this year, and that was when the childhood lead poisoning actually peaked. So not only did they not have corrosion control, but they didn't even have a target pH to shoot for, and so when it was dropping down to near 7, which is just very, very dangerous in a city where 50% lead pipes and lead solder in virtually every home, we feel that triggered a massive spike in childhood lead poisoning. Had it not been for Leanne and the work of this team, this really would have been a tragedy. They really averted a tragedy because I think we stopped the exposure before the worst was about to be unleashed on the city. So that is the gold lining here amidst obviously all the bad things that happened.
Were we looking at a pH of 4?
No, you don't need to go down that low. It got as low as 7.2, and that's very, very dangerous for pure lead pipes in a water with that low of an alkalinity. No inhibitor. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Dr. Edwards, thank you for the presentation. It was really enlightening. In the spirit of making sense of this situation, Hillary Clinton, in a recent rally in Iowa, is quoted as saying, "This is not just an environmental disaster and a health crisis, but a civil rights issue." Dr. Edwards, based on your experience on the ground, is it your opinion that there was an underlying racial or income class bias by state and local officials in the systematic disregard of the health of the residents of Flint?
It's my opinion that the latter was true, that there was an arrogance amongst these bad actors, and it wasn't just a few bad apples, there was several of them. And these are the very people at agencies who are paid to protect us from lead in drinking water, who were not only forgot to follow the law, but covered it up. And I think had it been in a city of higher income, they never would have tried to get away with what they tried to do, I think. This is my opinion. When Leanne called me August 4th, and they were bragging to Flint residents that no one would help them. They bragged to Leanne that Mr. Del Toro had been handled, which I knew meant that there was a deal between EP and MDQ to not do anything to help Flint residents. So this is it speaks to this corrupt culture that we have within some of our government agencies, and we have no way, we don't hold these people accountable for what they do. The perpetrators have only been suspended from their job. It's practically impossible to get these people fired. Hedman is a political appointee. She's out. So I definitely think the power differential's there, the income differential, but these are just really bad people, frankly. And it's amazing how hard they work to not do their job. It's just stunning to me. It would have been so much easier at almost every point to just do their job. And it almost became a prideful thing for them to see how far they could push their power.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I was wondering, as someone who isn't in a STEM field, I'm not really sure what the long-term repercussions are and if there's anything else you're going to be looking for going forward in your research with Flint. So could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, things are really in turmoil right now because obviously about $100 million has been dedicated to trying to remediate this man-made disaster. And you now have major branches of government moving in, and it's unprecedented. They really don't even know what to do at this point. They know how to respond to a hurricane, for example. But what do you do when you've damaged children in a city irreparably with the best known neurotoxin and damaged the pipe infrastructure of a city? So we're kind of on uncharted ground now, and all these people are there, and there's so many people wanting to help, they're kind of tripping over each other at this point. That's a great thing to see. I mean, but it's really sort of unclear what our role will be going forward, because I think everyone is just sorting that out. And we just had a meeting with the governor yesterday, and thinking about how are we going to handle this issue. No one knows. Never done this before.
Well, good luck.
Yeah, we'll need it. Thank you.
Hi, Dr. Edwards and Sid. My name is Lauren Farah, and I'm a new staff writer for the Collegiate Times here at Virginia Tech. First of all, I would just really like to say thank you so much. It's clear by how many people are here and in the overflow rooms watching this online, by the amount of support that you've gotten, that this is just an incredible story, and so thank you. And my question for you is, have you seen any implications of this happening anywhere else in the nation, either with contamination or policy?
With policy, you mean?
Or a similar, kind of a similar repetition of what's happened at Flint.
Oh, okay. Well, I think, it's very clearly acknowledged that the federal lead and copper rule is very weak, and there's been a lot of cheating going on in the open, right under the nose of EPA. As recently as 3 years ago, I was at a conference where people were actually bragging about how they were cheating on the lead and copper rule. People from the EPA Office of Water were sitting right there in the office, in the audience, and did nothing about it. Nothing. And so I blame EPA because they created this culture where just basically anything goes, and throw this sample out, throw that sample out, change this value. So there's no doubt there is a problem around the country. EPA has acknowledged that already, and they're revising the lead and copper rule, and I hope it does get revised. And with Leanne on the scene, I think they're going to do the right thing. But Flint was unique because, at least in other cities, you are offered the minimal protection of federal law. And Flint was the only city in the United States who didn't even have a plan to control corrosion. Not even a plan to control corrosion for 18 months. So it's an outlier.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all for your presentation today. And my question is, I guess, we heard that it's going to be very expensive to replace pipes, you know, $1 trillion or something. And right now, people don't know what to do in Flint. Like, are there any next generation technologies, leapfrog technologies, that you think might be potential solutions to this problem?
Well, there's really no substitute for repairing, replacing, you know, these pipes. It's expensive. You have to dig them up. And, you know, the issue is, of all our infrastructure in this country, it's all in bad shape. But the drinking water and the pipes are worse because you can't see it. It's out of sight, you know, out of mind. If you ever really saw what your pipes look like, we never show that to you, by the way. You don't want to see that. So this is something, you know, we have to decide what our priorities are as a society, what kind of, you know, people we are, and is this something we want to ignore? And the reality is that if you look at the funding future for discretionary spending in this country, everybody is going to be feeling the pinch. You know, so where are we going to invest? You know, there's not going to be a magic pot of money that just appears out of nowhere and allows us to fix these pipes. So we do need some transformative technologies. We need to get better lifetime out of the pipes that we have through corrosion control, for example. But you know, it's going to come down really to prioritization.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hello, Dr. Edwards. I'm Claire.
I'm Becca. Hi.
And so as Blacksburg High School students, we want to thank you and your team for all the hard work you guys have done for us. Thank you guys so much. And so we were wondering if one day in the future, most states face like the same problems, like serious water problem. What action would you and your team take, or
what we could take to help remedy the situation?
You mean so it's another case like Flint, or it's a...
If any water problems were to happen in the future, what could we do as well as...
Well, you know, I mean, I think what we learn in our class is, you know, you have to help first and figure out how to do it after the fact. You know, I mean, if there's a child in harm's way, you have to act in that moment, or else that time has passed, and your opportunity to make a difference is gone. So we talk about that in our class. It's a class on ethics and heroism, and it's, I don't know, people seem to like the class. So, but, you know, really, I think the key point, and, you know, I'll say this to high schoolers, is you guys get this. So I maintain that people are born heroic, okay? The younger the kids are, the easier doing the right thing is to understand. And unfortunately, it's our education system that teaches you to be willfully blind, to look the other way, and to be cowards. And it's also our institutions. And I have a TED Talk that I gave about, you know, the DC lead and water crisis, which was called Heroic by Nature, Cowardly by Convenience. And the net result of the DC effort is that 5 whistleblowers who put their careers on the line to protect the public lost their job. 5 heroic scientists and engineers got fired, and all the perpetrators kept their jobs. And so that is sending a very powerful message. And if you want to know why our agencies are so corrupt, only look at what happened in Washington, D.C. The strong, heroic people were kicked out, and the weak cowards kept their jobs. And that's what, unfortunately, we have in terms of the leadership in a lot of our government agencies today. Weak cowards. Unethical weak cowards.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is a little more local, but recently Dominion Power was given permission by the Virginia DEQ to allow coal ash to flow into Virginia rivers. So I was wondering how people in Virginia and other states can monitor their water and report that to state agencies and institutions such as Virginia Tech.
Okay. Well, I think one of the things we learn about in our class, and one of the things that makes heroic action difficult as a scientist or engineer or a citizen, is you really don't know when you get started. You don't know for sure. When we went to Flint, I told Leanne, we might find out the water's safe. You know, we very well could spend all this money and just prove there's nothing to this. So it really takes, you know, a long-term effort. You got to find some resources and people to help you. The odds are certainly against you, but I think, you know, there's nothing. I mean, if you put your mind to something, you can start turning over rocks and see if something slimy comes out. And in Flint, every rock we turned over had something slimy under it, as was the case in DC. But I'm sure there, you know, there's many times you get started on that journey and you just go, oh, I don't think so. You know, it doesn't look as bad as I thought. So you won't know until you start asking questions and then, you know, judging the types of answers you get. I mean, you're getting rational responses or someone just blowing you off, as we saw in Washington, D.C. and in Flint. Yeah, thank you.
Hi. So a little anecdote. I'm from a small town called Hesperia, California. And if anybody in here is familiar with the movie Aaron Brockovich, the PG&E crisis that occurred several decades ago, I guess more than anything, my question has to do with how are you going to maintain the kind of publicity that you're bringing to this issue? Because I think with issues like this, the PG&E crisis is still significantly affecting people in Hesperia, California. There's not a lot of research that's been done. Sorry, I'm a mama bear. There's not a lot of research that's been done, but the nurses and doctors in that town have been known to say that it's 1 in 5 cancer rate at this point. So we make this huge spectacle of an issue, and then people forget about it. And so my question is, how are we going to, as citizens, right? We're all very concerned about this. How are we going to not forget in a month that this is occurring and that there are lives that are going to be significantly affected by this crisis?
Right, and I think that's one of the amazing things about this story is that there's something in this that makes every one of us angry to our core. And it's very rare that you'll find something that is so unifying. And I know that this has been very, very politicized, and certain people want to use it to get at this person, and other people want to use it to get at that group. But I think the thing that really is amazing is there's something in this that really strikes a chord in all of us. And I think we look at Flint and we say, we're better than this. But yet, are we really? And so that's why this is such a disturbing story. It's profoundly disturbing to everyone that's heard it. And I really think, you know, I'm hopeful we'll get some bipartisan action to fix some of these problems. And the one that I think is most urgent is fix this culture of corruption at government, science, and engineering agencies, where the very people paid to protect us have this kind of arrogant attitude. And, you know, none of us are safe until we get this fixed. None of us are safe.
I actually have a question for you, Leanne. I was wondering what your exposure to environmental engineering and to drinking water treatment was before August and before this all happened, what it was like becoming a big person in this issue over?
I am self-taught.
Okay.
We were in a public meeting, and the emergency manager and one of the people from the DEQ decided they were going to tell me that I was stupid and that I was a liar. That is not my drinking water, and that, you know, if I thought people were going to believe that, I was stupid. And my daughter, that picture you guys saw where it was me and the young girl holding the bottles up, that was my daughter. And she actually stepped back and said to Melissa, she was the other girl with the hair, you couldn't see her face, my mom's going to jail tonight, she's going to punch him. And I didn't. But it was then that I realized that we needed to figure out a way to get them to hear us, to make people believe us that there was something wrong. And the only way to do that was science. We had to get to the science. So I started gathering reports and reading reports and teaching myself what they meant and what the different chemicals were, and went from there. So,
I think it's working.
okay. So just from that, I mean, that's how it, became. When I was talking with Miguel from the EPA, we were going through it one day, and I told him I didn't think we were using corrosion control. And he was like, no, it's federal law. They have to. I said, well, I'm telling you, from what I'm reading, we're not. And he said, where are you getting them from? I said, the monthly operational reports from the city of Flint. Send them to me. I sent it to him. He called me back. He said, oh, my God, they're not using corrosion control. I said, yeah, that's what I thought. So, and from that point forward, I mean, it was just about the science. And then with working with Marc and Sid and, being taught, additional things, I mean, that's how we went forward with this.
There's just so many amazing anecdotes too, but I really just have to share one that happened last week. I asked Leanne to go and take some chlorine measurements in the system. And within about 30 minutes, 6 film crews had called me and wanted to follow her around as she went to take chlorine measurements in Flint. And they were all there with you, like the whole time. Then EPA found out she was sampling, and they were chauffeuring her around to the sites. And on top of that, the EPA guys did not know how to do a chlorine measurement, and Leanne had to show them how to do it because they were doing it wrong. One last question.
So you mentioned that General Motors noticed the effects of the Flint water and then stopped using it. Did they release everything that they found, or could you elaborate on how they were involved in the whole development?
Well, that was obvious. So there were so many red flags going off that should have, within a month, alerted these guys who forgot to follow the law that they should follow the law, implement corrosion control. So that was probably the 6th red flag where GM just said, we can't use your water, we're out. And that was a huge blow because that was 10% of the demand of the system just left. And even then, no one asked, it's rusting their car parts. Like, what's it doing to the pipes in our distribution system? I mean, you just can't make this stuff up, people. I mean, seriously, So that's how crazy it is. Yeah, they just claimed it was bad for car parts, but perfectly fine for Flint residents. Yeah.
So thank you all for coming. Thank you all for watching over the internet feed. As you're leaving, there is a banner, a sheet where you can sign and provide well wishes for the citizens of Flint, the Flintstones, as we've heard. And so that's outside. Look for that.
Everyone sign that banner.
And again, thank you, and join me in thanking this amazing team. And this is Virginia Tech.
You okay, man?